Alright, how's it going everyone? So today I've got another post practice video for you guys, so be sure to grab your pencil, your paper, and try to draw along with me if that's what you want to do. But yeah, this is the first pose that we've got, and as you can see, looks kind of weird. I was just looking around for pose references and I saw this. I was like, wow, that leg looks mad weird. And that's the only reason why I wanted to draw this, for no other reason than just to, practice the legs a little bit. For this video, I've got two different types of figure drawing. This first one is just a regular pose drawing, I guess, mostly just trying to copy the gesture as well as the outlines. And then the second one is kind of a skeleton study, because I've been practicing drawing full body skeletons recently. So that's something I'm trying to get better at, and I figured I might as well show it off here. And if you guys are drawing along with me, then you can also attempt to do that and see that it's actually not as intimidating, or it's actually not as hard as it looks. It's pretty intimidating when you start, but it's very doable. But anyway, that's for the next pose. For this pose, as you can see, the leg looks extremely long. And that's mostly because she's standing on the tips of her toes. You don't see that particularly often. I think it's mostly a ballerina thing. But because she's doing that, you also have to include the length of the entire foot in the lower leg, and it makes it look way longer than the upper leg. And the fact that she's also kind of bending over, it makes her upper torso look a lot smaller than the lower part of her body. So the proportions get thrown off a lot. If you slice off her feet, it looks like this, and that looks a lot more normal, proportion-wise at least. Also, she's standing on a chair, so you can get some, I guess, perspective practice in there, some solid perspective practice. And something stupid that I did when I drew this is I didn't decide where the horizon line was right at the start. It's just about on the level of the top surface of the chair. But yeah, I should have decided on that right at the start, because now everything looks a little flat. That's my bad for thinking I was good enough to actually draw without drawing the horizon line first. Anyway, this first section of the video is me just drawing or trying to figure out the angles between all the different body parts, the angles, the proportions, and kind of playing around with the gesture as well. And then after this, I'm going to do another pass, trying to clean up the forms a little bit, add some more anatomical forms. But technically, if you're trying to practice, the first sketch that I made is actually good enough. You don't really have to clean it up. But that also comes down to what exactly you're practicing. Like I said before, there's no point in doing figure drawings if you're not doing it with a specific goal in mind. Whether that be getting better at gesture, getting better at anatomy, perspective, you have to have some sort of goal when you're trying to draw these things. Another thing I just noticed I did wrong is because the horizon line is all the way down at the level of the chair, everything above that is going to be converging downwards, and especially her shoulders. If you look at her left shoulder, it's a lot higher compared to her right shoulder. It's kind of difficult to see because her body's covering the right shoulder, but that left shoulder is really high up, and I did not take that into consideration. So if you're trying to draw along with this pose, really pay attention to the angle between the left and right shoulders. I know I've talked a lot about angles in some of my other pose practice videos, but something I actually haven't talked about is negative space. And on this pose, you can actually see a very clear example of negative space. If you look at her left arm, left leg, and then her torso, in between them, there's like kind of a triangle shape. So if you're trying to draw that area, make sure that that triangle shape actually exists in your own drawing. In my case, I think I made her thigh a little too big, which means the triangle is smaller than it should have been. I think I also made her arm a little too short. But yeah, that's another cheat you can use when you're trying to draw from reference. So we have measuring angles, using negative space, and also measuring proportions. I think if you know how all three of those things work, it'll be really easy to draw things from reference, or at least easier to draw from reference. Now, this is the pose I was talking about earlier on in the video about drawing a full body skeleton. So the way I started off with this was just deciding on some basic shapes, like the ovals for the rib cage and pelvis, then some curved lines and straight lines for the legs, trying to figure out the angles as well as the gesture, making sure that the pose does not look that stiff. Because as you can see in the reference, he's putting his weight on his left hip and then kind of leaning back with his upper body. So you have that C curve of the spine, and I tried to capture that initially. If you just immediately hop into trying to draw the anatomy without capturing those gestural forms first, you're most likely going to end up making your pose look a little too stiff unless you know what you're doing. So when it comes to studying anatomy, I think practicing the skeleton is a lot more important than practicing the muscles. People always immediately want to jump into the muscles because those are the things you can actually see on the surface, and they create finished looking characters. But the skeleton consists of a bunch of inorganic forms, meaning those forms don't change no matter how you move them. They're always going to be drawn according to a solid perspective. Whereas the muscles, they can change. If you extend your arm, the bicep extends, whereas if you flex your arm, the bicep contracts. The form changes and the perspective on that changes as well. But with the humerus, the perspective never changes. So if you get really good at drawing the humerus, your perspective is always going to be solid, and you can always make a really good looking drawing. So if you're going to study anatomy, you should most likely study the skeleton, because that's going to help you improve the fastest. And this actually goes back to a video I made yesterday about drawing guidelines. Guidelines are really good to draw because they let you figure out exactly where you went wrong. The guidelines are always drawn according to perspective. So if there's a perspective issue with the full drawing, all you have to do is look at the guidelines, see where that issue is, and then try to fix that. The skeleton is basically a guideline. If the muscles look wrong in the final piece, all you have to do is look at the skeleton, see where the skeleton went wrong perspective-wise or maybe proportion-wise, and then try to fix that. And then once that's fixed, you can properly attach the muscles. At least that's the idea I'm trying to experiment with right now. And for this pose, I probably should have gone with something that was a bit more dynamic, because with this particular pose, it's like I'm essentially just drawing a stick figure. You know, I have to pay attention to the proportions and kind of the shape of the bones, but it's more or less just a stick figure. I actually learned quite a bit from this drawing now that I look back at it. Mostly proportions, because I think I made his hips a little too wide, which either comes down to his pelvis being too wide or his femurs being too wide. Looking at this, I think it's a femur issue. I wish he wasn't wearing pants though, so I could actually see the pelvis. But yeah, I think it's a femur issue, or maybe the shoulders aren't too wide. I'll have to overlay this on top of the actual drawing to see where exactly I went wrong. But yeah, this seems like a pretty good way to practice proportions. His left leg should also be moved a bit more towards the center line, because it's a bit too far out right now. And I mean, he still looks balanced, but I think it kind of loses the dynamism of the original pose. And then for some reason, I also wanted to draw the skull in there. And at this size, it's really hard to draw detail in the skull. The proportions on it were also wrong, because I drew that original head shape without the intention of drawing a skull. It was just there as a placeholder. But if I'm going to draw skulls from this point on, I'll also pay more attention to that. And this video seems to be wrapping up, so hope you guys learned something from this. And we also have a Discord server linked in the description where you can draw along with me. I try to post daily figure drawings in the Discord whenever I can, at least. And Patreon, as well as a YouTube memberships, is also linked in the description if you want to support the channel. But yeah, I guess I will see you all in the next video.